All right, welcome to Physical Geography. Um, my name is Dr. John Douglas. I'm going to be speaking to you via these presentations. Hopefully, you enjoy them. I'm kind of looking forward to giving this a go. I love talking about this stuff. So, nice to meet you. I'm going to meet you in lab later on. But in case you watch this first, Kurt Hill also teaches this class. He's a great guy. Um, So let me take a look at what we're going to talk about in this class. First thing is, what is science? Then we'll talk a little bit about how science operates. Then we're going to look into what physical geography is and the three main subdisciplines. Then we're going to take a look at energy and how it relates to physical geography, and then systems and how they relate to physical geography. And the reason we're going to talk about energy and systems is because those are the two core concepts that drive the class. Cool. All right, so let's start with science. What the heck is science? Um, I can't remember where I got this definition from. It's intense. The observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. And it works, right? That's a definition of science. But oftentimes, uh, I worry that definitions like that oh, sorry, let me shoot, that ladies like up here in the left corner wearing their lab coats, messing with these beakers. You know, we got more beakers over here. That it can be kind of intimidating, and you don't want to forget about all the equations that are associated with it, more chemicals and whatnot, diagrams. Science has a tendency to come across as unfun, uncool, and you tend to have bad eyesight. Oh, and it's just fundamentally scary. So we're trying to move on from that view of science. And let's take a look a little bit at what else science is. Um, let's start up here with our race car. Science is hugely involved in determining how airflow is going to flow over this car to keep it stuck to the road. Science has a lot to do with figuring out what kind of foods we eat. Somebody a long time ago, let's say, picked up this little pumpkin thing on the ground and had to give it a bite, right? They had to try it out, had to test it out, just give it a go. Does it make me grow longer hair or have bad breath or cause me to die? And if you're the person who took a bite, might have gave it to his little sister. See what his little sister thought. Not too cool, but that probably happened. But in the process, even though those simple kind of trial and error, that's all science. You're figuring stuff out. Down here, we have a sound stage. Obviously, there's a lot of science, a lot of trial and error in figuring out how to distribute sound equally across the stage or unequally depending on what they're trying to do. So in this class, our definition of science is going to be down here, working with other people to try and figure something out. That is our definition of science, not the scary one from before. All right, so now we have a definition of science. Let's take a little bit deeper look at how science works. This is the scientific method. You've seen it, I'm sure, in your schooling or whatever. There's 6 steps. I order these maybe a little bit differently than what you've seen. My personal preference. We're going with step 1 is you observe, collect data. 2, after looking at that data, you ask a question. 3 is you hypothesize. All a hypothesis means is it's your answer to your question. It's your best guess. What do you think the answer to your question is? Now, a lot of people just call it good. They look at some stuff. They're like, I wonder why all Ferraris are red. And they go, I bet Ferraris are red because they look awesome red. And then they leave it at that. They don't go out to further test the hypothesis. Like, Ferraris are a stupid example, but what have you. So in science, you got to go deeper. You got to test the hypothesis. And you got to do that through a carefully designed methodology. You can't You want to control all the variables that could affect your hypothesis, your answer to the question, as best you can, and isolate the variable you think is key to explaining your question. 5 is you explain your results. You either falsified or failed to falsify your results. And the reason we say falsify or fail to falsify is because you can never prove something 100% correct. I know that sounds weird, right? You could look at your hand and say, my hand 100% exists. And that's great, but in science, oftentimes, well, in life, if you're interested in a question, it's something that's not obvious. It's something that you're diving deeper into the nuances of how our world works, how society works, how cells in your body work. And you always have to keep in mind that whatever methodology you came up with to test your question is just one methodology, and you have to recognize that people in the future are going to come up with methodologies, and they might test your question as well and could prove you wrong. They could have thought about it from a different angle that you didn't think of or didn't have the ability to address. So science always builds on itself. It's never done. It's an ongoing process, but all scientists contribute to our knowledge base. They always continue and build over time and add to it, which is fun. Well, it doesn't sound fun, but it can be fun. Hopefully I can explain that a little bit later. Anyway, lastly, you got to recommend future work. And you need to recommend future work because once you've done some studying, you're the expert on whatever it is you studied. Probably the expert in the world. Because whatever particular question you spent all this time looking at, nobody knows more about it than you. And if you just keep all that information to yourself, you are not going to contribute to the knowledge base that's out there. So you have a responsibility to do that, to branch out and not branch out, share, contribute to the community, to understand what others have done before you and contribute your work to what they've done so others in the future can utilize it. Part of a team. All right, well, hopefully that made some sense. Let's take a look down here at this picture right here. And as you look at this picture, you can see we got a bunch of saguaros over here on the south side of the mountain and hardly any saguaros over here on the left side of the mountain, the north side of the mountain. That's interesting, right? So using this scientific method, our observations are we got saguaros south, no saguaros north. Now we can ask a question. Why are the saguaros growing on the south side and not on the north side? Well, oh, thankfully that didn't ruin what I did. Okay, we can hypothesize, and I'm just going to throw the hypothesis. I'm going to say because it's steeper over on the north side and it's shallower over here on the south side. All right, cool. So now I have my hypothesis. Saguaros tend to grow on flatter ground. Well, that's pretty easy to test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a nice map that shows the terrain of, let's say, Phoenix. And I'm going to kind of mark off areas that are basically, I'm going to make it simple. They're either steep or not steep, which kind of simplifies it. But it makes it easier for me then to go out and mark saguaros that are growing on steep stuff and saguaros that are growing on not so steep stuff. And then see if there's a correlation and see if, is it steepness that controls it, or is it, can saguaros grow where it's steep on the south side? See if I can find a spot that'll do that, and that would falsify my hypothesis. So I'm going to pretend I go out, I do that work, I go look at all the saguaros all over the place, and sure enough, I'm going to find that saguaros can grow on fairly steep slopes, but they're going to do it on the south side. And as a result, I have falsified my hypothesis. I did not support it. And that might seem like a bummer, like, oh man, I went to all this work and I falsified it. But don't worry about it. That's how science works. Through falsification, nobody else ever has to worry about thinking that steepness affects where saguaros grow. You've ironed it out. You've done the work to back up why that hypothesis does not explain Saguaro distribution. So that's pretty cool. Plus, after doing all that work, you're like, man, it's not slope, but in recommending future work, I bet soil moisture has something to do with it. And that gives something for other people to push on with. Okay. I need to stop for a second. All right, so now let's take a break. And there's a link at the bottom of this slide. YouTube.com, watch QXJN, blah, blah, blah. Stop watching this presentation and go watch that link. Then come back to the presentation and we're going to talk about it. So we took a look at the video where the not little, but sounded like a younger guy, really excited about his egg that gets sucked into the bottle. The reason I had you look at that is I wanted you to think about the scientific process in relation to what he did. And what he did, it's not an experiment, he was just observing. And well, he might have been an experiment if he was testing something, but we're just going to use it as observation. So as you observe it, the main question obviously is, why did the egg get sucked into that bottle? And cool. The next part is hypothesis. Why did the egg get sucked in the bottle? So I'm sure you probably thought about it, and some of you guys might have said, I know why. Because when you put that flame inside the cone and put the egg on top, flame requires oxygen. And so when that flame burns, it burns up the oxygen, one of the gases that make up that the air inside the flask. Once that oxygen is gone, you have a different air pressure between what's in the flask and the outside atmosphere, and that causes the egg to get sucked into the flask. And that's part of it. And I want you to think about that, because air pressure is a key concept that we're going to learn later in this class, and it's tough to visualize. I just said after that flame burnt out, there was a lower air pressure inside the flask than there was outside. And that difference in air pressure caused the egg to get sucked in. There's a lower air pressure inside the bottle. And again, that's another concept I can't show you. I can't hand you air pressure to help you visualize it. So it's demonstrations like this that are kind of helpful. So maybe think about this later on in the class. But that's part of the reason why the egg got sucked in. Another key concept is the flame heated up the air inside the flask. So before he was able to put the egg on top of the flask, that air heated up and it expanded. And when it expanded, it actually caused a lot of the air inside that flask to escape, because the air expanded. Once the flame went out and it cooled off, the air contracted dramatically. And as it contracts and cools off, again, that's going to cause a drop in air pressure, a substantial drop in air pressure. And that's actually the key drop in air pressure that allows the egg to get sucked in. So if those are our hypotheses, and we're going to use this as a scientific example, then you want to come up with a methodology to test it. So one way you could test it is you put the egg on top of a flask with something that generates a lot of heat, but it isn't a flame. So maybe like a small curling iron or something. And it's really, really hot. And you drop it in there, let that air inside the flask heat up, then put the egg on top. And then it's going to take a long time for the whole thing to cool off inside there. But once it cools off, you'll have a sharp drop in air pressure and that egg should get sucked in. That's a potential, methodology to test it. But I haven't done it. That's the thing about science, is you don't know until you've actually tried. And it could turn out that, that whatever hot object you put in there doesn't generate a drop in air pressure. And then you got to stop and think about it. What's going on? But that's how you come up with a methodology. After you're done, you look at your results, and then you share with everybody else. But hopefully this, in a way, lets you think of science in a little bit more fun way than saguaros on a ridge. Okay, if a bunch of people start to work together on a problem, science kind of looks like, I don't know why I just read all those words, you could read it. A good way to think about science is is it's like building a puzzle. Um, you're adding pieces, which are these hypotheses that you've tested, and it might seem like a little thing, right? Like the saguaro example that I used. It's like, who really cares if saguaros where they grow or whatever? But it's a piece to this overall puzzle of knowledge that we build, and things interlock and interlink in ways that individuals can't appreciate at the time. But when you're able to look at it from a bigger picture, that knowledge can actually paint or describe or illustrate, a really incredible world that we live in, and provides us a lot of understanding. So it's incredibly powerful, and it's really invigorating to participate in it. And I encourage all of you to choose a scientific field to participate in. It's very rewarding in that regard. Oh, look, here is a puzzle. I forgot I added this image. There you go. There's science as a tree and a person. It looks like maybe getting water. We've got some inkling of what the world is looking like, but obviously there's gaps left to be in place, and those gaps are for you to fill in. The future generations. There's always stuff to improve upon. Okay, the science of physical geography. It's a study of all physical elements and processes that make up the environment. Energy, air, water, weather, climate, landforms, soils, animals, plants, microorganisms, and looking at the planet as a whole, Earth. We break physical geography into three main subcomponents, and it's going to make more sense when you look at the three subcomponents, so let me get to those. All right, the first thing that we're going to look at is climatology. And just real quick, before we dive into climatology, we're actually going to learn a little bit about how Earth orbits around the sun and how solar energy gets distributed on the planet. That kind of information is background information that then we apply to climatology. The three major components of climatology are temperature, pressure, and humidity. Those aren't the only things by far, but those three aspects of our atmosphere drive a lot of the weather systems on our planet and are major concepts that we have to cover. And along the way, we're going to learn about snowfall, how light interacts with our atmosphere to generate colors, tornadoes. I love tornadoes, just don't want one to hit me. Hurricanes, lightning, don't get struck by that stuff, and haboobs. I'll remember to talk about haboobs. They're cool. Dust storms. All right, we're also going to talk about geomorphology. This is the back half of the class. Geomorphology is kind of the interaction between the climatic systems and the rock of Earth. The mountains, the valleys, all that stuff that protrudes this rock landforms. 30% of our planet has rock that sticks above the oceans and interacts with our climate. And it interacts through weathering, hillslope processes, and fluvial processes to generate things like these mountains and these alluvial fans and rivers with floodplains and canyons, and through processes like debris flows. And it's awesome stuff. Weathering is just the breakdown of rocks. Hillslope processes move the rocks off the mountains down to the rivers, and then rivers move the stuff out into the oceans. Lastly, and I apologize, we're only going to cover biogeography a tiny, teeny little bit. Not that it's not very important, but we just don't have time in the class to cover everything totally thoroughly. Biogeography covers animals, plants, and microorganisms and their distribution on the planet. They don't grow everywhere. They don't live everywhere. They don't migrate everywhere. And there's forces like fires that are going to impact them. There's forces like droughts. I mean, even right here you have grass and then you have trees. That's a boundary known as an ecotone, and you're going to have different species that live along that boundary but don't live in the grass or deeper in the forest. So we're going to look at those distributions and interactions of life. Over here we have lichens that are growing on rock. These are microorganisms. Might not seem very important, but these microorganisms are working to weather and break down this rock, eroding it, and how big these lichens grow. We can use them to date how long rocks have been sitting there. So it's all very relevant, very interesting stuff. Those are the three major components: climatology, geomorphology, biogeography. All right, let's look at physical geography from an energy perspective. I apologize. I always do that. I always go, I make that sound. I don't know why I do that. But anyway, energy perspective. Energy is tough because I can't hand you energy. I could hand you a battery, and in your mind, you know it has energy in it. It has electricity. It could power your remote control car. But you're not actually holding the energy. You're holding metal that's storing the energy. So it's kind of tough. So I'm going to go with calories to give us a visual. 1 calorie is the energy required to increase 1 cubic centimeter of water 1 degree Celsius. So if we burned this king-size Snickers, you could increase a fair amount of water many degrees Celsius. And you would do more water heating with the king size than you would with the fun size. Cool. If you look over here, here's a pot of water. It's boiling, and it's getting its heat transferred from the stove, which is hot because of electricity heating up these coils. It is transferring to that water, allowing it to boil. What's fascinating about energy, though, is, okay, cool, this is energy, but if you think of something that uses energy, what is the ultimate source of that energy? What's driving it? And let's take a look at these coils in the stove, right? What is the ultimate source for energy in these coils in the stove that are heating up? So let's talk about that for a second. Those coils in your stove are heating up because of electricity being powered to your house. You get electricity in your house from power plants. And there's a variety of power plants out there. You have hydro power plants where water falls down through a dam, spins turbines, and generates electricity. Hydrothermal. I'm sorry, not hydrothermal. Hydropower. A lot of power plants, they burn coal, and to power your power plant, you have wind turbines, which are not very common, but it's one way to generate electricity. You have nuclear power plants, you have natural gas power plants, you even have geothermal power plants. So there's all kinds of power plants out there. Let me just stick with one that's very common here in Phoenix, and those are coal burning power plants. Well, not in Phoenix, but in Arizona. Coal burning power plants burn coal, and coal is nothing but old fossilized diatoms, stuff that collects in oceans over time, little critters that were able to photosynthesize to be alive, just like plants do. And what's cool about them is those little critters are like little batteries of solar energy. They have stored that energy. They have converted solar light into glucose, and that glucose is still stored in these little diatoms that are made that what coal is made of. So you can burn it. You can burn that glucose. That's not glucose anymore, but that's what it was when it was alive. And when you burn it, you can, just like on the stove here, you can boil water. That water turns to steam, and it can spin your generators. So in that case, for our stove here, the ultimate source could be this coal, but it's not coal, right? Because the coal used to be life that got its energy from the sun. So then the sun is the ultimate source of the energy. But then you got to go, well, why does the sun have energy? Well, the sun has energy because of nuclear power. And that's because the sun is nothing but a helium making machine. It's busy taking two hydrogen atoms, fusing them together to make helium atoms, which are slightly bigger than hydrogen. And in the process, it releases a tremendous amount of energy. But then if we even go deeper than that, what's the ultimate source? What's providing the energy to actually cause these molecules to fuse? That's gravity. It's because gravity is forcing the sun, because it has, the more mass you have, the stronger the gravitational force. The sun's so big, the gravitational force is enough for those hydrogens to fuse. So ultimately, it's gravity, which is kind of awesome, mind-blowing. Anyway, I dived a little too deep there, but energy, important perspective to consider when we look at our planet and physical geography. There's 4 types of energy in the universe and also on our planet. The first one we got is the strong nuclear force, which is solar energy. Our solar energy is an example. So it's basically fission and fusion. That's where I was talking about. Anytime you fuse atoms together, like 2 hydrogens to make helium, you're going to release a lot of energy. If you take a really big atom like uranium and split it into smaller pieces, you're going to release energy. So anytime you mess with matter at the atom scale, you'll deal with energy if you fuse it or blow it apart. The weak nuclear force, isotopic decay, this is kind of neat. Well, we're going to dive deeper in this later in the class, but our planet is made up of a lot of different atoms. And all our atoms were made in old suns, which is neat, and also made in old supernovas, and also made back in the Big Bang. And all these places where these atoms were made were really, really hot. Earth isn't anywhere near as hot or have the same forces acting on it now as it did back in suns and supernovas and stuff. So some of our atoms are not very stable, and they'll decay over time. And as they decay, they give off energy, and that energy actually heats up our planet. Our planet is hot in the interior. We have volcanoes and plate tectonics and stuff because we have atoms that make up our planet that are not stable, that decay over time and basically give off heat when they decay from one type of atom into a different type of atom. I'll go into more detail later, but that's cool. Weak nuclear force. That's why Earth is hot on the inside. That's Earth energy. Electromagnetism, electrons streaming together to do stuff. They can form magnetic fields. They can allow areas of positive charge to, negative charge to discharge into a positive thing. That's what happens with lightning. The third force, and unless we have gravity, and like I had mentioned before, gravity kind of impacts everything, but the general idea with gravity is the bigger the something is, the more attractive force it has. And what's fascinating is gravity is actually really weak compared to all these other forces, but fundamentally without gravity we don't have anything in the universe. Everything would just spread out and fall apart. So in a way, gravity is everything. Maybe that's too deep. Anyway, 4 types of energy. All right. Systems perspective. Systems sound kind of tough, but it's totally not a big deal. Systems are things. So this box is a thing. And this thing is doing some kind of energy and material conversion, or it might be storing stuff. If it was a plant, it's converting solar energy into glucose, and it's storing that energy, and it stores carbon dioxide through photosynthesis to allow it to get carbon to actually build the plant itself. The system is just the thing. The inputs to a system allow it to do what it's doing. So if it's a plant, it needs solar energy, it needs the atmosphere, and it needs nutrients from the soil. Outputs from a plant are, it gives off oxygen, it's going to give off its decayed matter when it dies, it's going to give off water to allow itself to cool off. And that's all a system is. It has inputs in order for the system to operate, and it has outputs in order for the system to operate. And if you ever mess with the outputs or inputs, it's going to affect the system. And I think I'm moving my red dot too much, but oh well. Let's take a look at a car as an example. So we all know cars. They allow us to drive around and look cool, depending on the car. And they require fuel, oxygen to ignite the fuel, oil, water, tires, resources, and you got to pay for the thing. Outputs for cars: you have to give off exhaust gases, heat energy. You're going to be able to move. oil waste, used tires, and depending on what you bought, you're going to have debt. That's what you have to have in order to have a car. If you mess with any of these things, let's say you plug up the exhaust of your car, it won't work. It can't operate if it can't actually get rid of those exhaust gases. Actually, I had a friend tell me that, I don't think it's turbo, but it's something like that. But basically, the faster you can get those gases out of your car, the faster your car can go because it can burn fuel faster, which is kind of neat. I don't really know that much about cars. But anyway, cars, good example of a system. Can you think of anything that operates as a system? You probably should. Might be helpful in the future. All right, let's look at this scary, freaky diagram. This is this whole thing is a flash forward. By the end of the class, this diagram should hopefully make more sense. But what I'm trying to do is, we're going to be looking at energy, so isotopic decay, solar energy, and then we're going to be looking at systems. We're going to be looking at the hydrologic cycle, the rock cycle, and how those two interact on our planet to make mountains. Where mountains require rock to be inputted into the mountain, then that rock gets weathered, broken down, transported by hill slopes, fluvials, and eventually dumped in the ocean. And there's going to be a balance between the amount weathered and eroded off and the amount added from below. And that balance allows mountains to stand tall for long periods of time. It's called mountain fountain. That probably went all over your head, but oh well. Just, that was a flash forward. Don't worry about it. You don't need to know it right now. Just let it simmer, I think is the term. Saute, maybe. No, it's not saute. Anyway. Okay. Earth from an energy and systems perspective. Okay. I just did okay twice. Anyway. These yellow lines are solar energy coming down and hitting our planet. That solar energy, shortwave energy, comes in and it heats up our planet. And then because our planet heats up, it gives off long wave energy out into space. It's called our heat, the heat that Earth gives off. And in a lot of regards, that's Earth as a system. We have one input, solar energy, one output, which is heat. If you want to get a little bit more specific, we get hit by comets, we get hit by meteorites that are added inputs. Hydrogen actually is too light for our planet to hold on to, so we degas hydrogen out into space. But fundamentally, solar energy, input, heat, output. And what's kind of neat is, well, is our system of Earth in balance. And that's what it means to be in equilibrium. If your inputs and outputs stay the same over time, you're considered to be in equilibrium. You're not in flux. Like with a car, you would be going the same speed. You wouldn't be speeding up or slowing down. The question is Earth in equilibrium? Right now, our planet is heating up. Is it heating up because we're getting more long or shortwave energy from the sun? Are we emitting less heat out into space? What's going on with our planet? It's an interesting way to look at it. Okay, here's our first things to know list. These are the things that you're going to want to know for the exam. The definition of science, easy one. The scientific process, what climatologists study, geomorphologists study, biographers, geographers study. I would understand an example of energy and its ultimate source. Provide an example of a system. And you should understand what equilibrium is. Equilibrium, again, is where the inputs and outputs in a system are the same over time, giving you stasis. Anyway, it's only about 30 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a fantastic rest of your day.